to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So we're going a little long this week, but that does not mean, Mike, that you should shortchange your very interesting and important discussion about Google and Yelp and the growth of Google reviews, which was a really great article that you can read in our analysis section.
So just to summarize the analysis, it was a case study I did of a moderately large fast casual chain in the South, Southwest, and Southeast areas of the United States, over 200 locations. And I followed the history of their reviews from 2013 to the present across the sites that they were appearing on, TripAdvisor and Yelp and Google and Facebook. And, clearly Yelp was struggling in this and Google was clearly dominating in this segment. I had the honor of being criticized for somewhat by Rand Fishkin. Obviously, it's always nice to be criticized by somebody who has 500,000 followers. Maybe I can get his attention again. But he noted that my article didn't tell the whole story of local reviews, doesn't point out some of the things that Google did, in terms of their utilizing their monopoly power to force local businesses to get reviews on Google. And I felt, that Rand's assessment was way too simplistic. And the reason I didn't include that in it, because I don't think that it is the driving force in the storyline. I think one is that it's much more complex. There are many markets, and I'm doing another piece of research which shows how it happened, how it was different in a sit-down restaurant. But so it's more complex than just Google being a bad guy. Admittedly, they have a monopoly, and they may have used that monopoly to disadvantage Yelp intentionally. But during the last 10 years, the prevailing legal theory has been the Bork theory, which is really Bork, no matter how you interpret it, but that the consumer welfare was the only consideration in antitrust, and the issues of controlling the broader economic and political power, business versus business, was irrelevant. So Google was operating under the prevailing legal framework, and you can't really blame them for maximizing their opportunity in that, right?
No, that's the logic of the market, and their shareholders will punish them if they don't, in fact, do that.
Exactly. So going back and retroactively saying they were bad, in fact, you could argue that Google was actually good. They made it easier for consumers to read reviews, to leave reviews, to get summaries of reviews. And certainly they made it better for business by helping businesses by sending a gazillion free leads their way.
Well, the irony is that in this particular case, monopoly simplifies everybody's life, right? It organizes the behavior of businesses in particular, but also consumers. It just focus on Google direct. You did that whole study of the Google only marketing strategy for that restaurant and was quite effective. And so this actually helps the small business owner because they can disregard all the other sites, right?
Right. And the problem with Rand's logic, which I may be summarizing this incorrectly. If I am Rand, you can correct me, but that Google was a monopoly. They use that to disadvantage their competitors, and therefore they've misused their monopoly power and are therefore bad. That's the basic of what I considered his criticism. But like you just pointed out, Google does what Google does, right? This is what businesses do. This is what we've honored in entrepreneurial capitalism. Building moats and creating monopolies is an honored activity. But the problem with Rand's criticism is that what you really need to do is look at the more systemic question of the theory of antitrust. You need to broaden it, obviously, but it's hard to broaden it and go back and say they were bad then, and they're not, you need to broaden it to include what they include in Europe and then change it at the systemic level, making clear guidelines so Google knows how to behave going forward if they did in fact do what Rand suggested, which is force businesses to get more reviews on Google, which I find is a really strained argument.
As did I. I think, still to this day, many years after this trend was well underway, that most businesses don't ask customers for reviews at all. Right. It's not like Google, it's not like Google is sort of forcing themselves to be the only game in town when it comes to asking for reviews, when most people aren't even doing that. I would also, Mike, I would just echo your consumer harm argument. I really don't have any sympathies for Yelp in this particular spot, because as you said, Google not only made it easier for people to leave reviews, their filter is far less penal than Yelp's is for new reviewers, which I think is important. But I also have to think they did consumer research, and if consumers really did want these War and Peace length tomes that Yelp espouses as, somehow indicating that their reviews are higher quality, air quotes, I think Google would have enforced that in their own platform. But I think that they've done a really great job, in my opinion, from a product standpoint, of encouraging these sort of shorter form reviews, but also pulling out the most germane pieces of each of those reviews, highlighting them with justifications, for example, underneath business names in a 3-pack, those kinds of things. And we just haven't seen Yelp, pivot to that sort of more structured, shorter form, more democratic, small d, democratic, review corpus. And I think that's an example of Google responding to what consumers want as opposed to intentionally harming them. So.
Right. And as Greg's pointed out, consumers want recommendations. They don't want to have to read all these reviews top to bottom, bottom to top, and make a decision. They want a recommendation, which, whether Google's doing it well or poorly, that's what Google's trying to do with a 3-pack. They're saying, here are the 3, pick.
Well, interestingly, years and years ago, the first time I met with Yelp, I don't know when it was like 2005, maybe. Jeremy Stolpelman I think they were on Market Street in San Francisco. It was a small office. It was in the very beginning, and he and I talked about, and I don't know if this was these were his words, or if this was sort of my characterization of what he was saying, but he was talking about Yelp being like a food blogging platform. It was like akin to a blogging platform for foodies, right? People who are really into restaurants and wanted to write sort of wax eloquently about their restaurant experiences. And that sort of initiated the culture of Yelp and the Yelp reviews as being these long form things. And also the Yelp Elite Squad, which was one of their early successes that helped propel them and helped them sort of win versus competitors at the time. Also, I think reinforced that, that there was a sort of a cadre of top tier elites who were writing these very lengthy reviews that were really not for ordinary people. They were really for themselves. It was a kind of an insider's experience. And that some of that has persisted to the present day, and it's kind of out of step with what people need and want, especially on mobile devices, which is where most of their traffic resides now.
So as a final closing note, I do have another article coming up, which points out that a company like, oh God, I can't even think of it. The reservation company. OpenTable can succeed in this same context where Yelp is failing. And that to me demonstrates both the fact that it's more than just the review. The review isn't just it's just a feature. It's not the product that Yelp is trying to make it that you described, that businesses and consumers need something bigger for it to succeed. And my article will point out that they have succeeded in spite of Google, in spite of Yelp, because they've done something that businesses needed. So,
well, I mean, in their case, they came out of the gate with this reservation system, and the reviews support the decision making, support the reservation system. It's a totally different relationship.
Right, exactly, and that's what I'm saying is that a review is a feature, not the product. And Yelp tried to make it the product, and in doing so, led them down a path where they could not compete with companies with better ideas, better customer service, better execution. And to a large extent, this particular situation is Yelp's fault. I think Google you can't hold Google harmless, but I think that this is a dynamic interplay of consumers, businesses, the market, the law, and it doesn't stand up well to Rand's simplistic critique.
And thanks to this week's sponsor, Google.
Might be the only.
Well,
No, that's
we don't.
that's not a real
not.
thing. We don't have any sponsors. There are
It
no
might
sponsors.
be one of the.
I'm talking to Jeremy Stoppelman
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
It might be one of
Get
the
off.
few positive Google Near Memos that this podcast puts out. So.
I'm just kidding. So, all right. So that was an upbeat note to end on. We got to end as long as now that while we got some, some positive vibes going here. All right. So, up and to the right, onward and upward.
Always
all of that.
great to talk to you guys, and thanks everyone for listening.
Yep.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.